Hi, I'm Lynn Cornell, and welcome to Journey Through the Bible Verse by Verse. Grab your Bibles and follow along as we study through each book of the Bible verse by verse and chapter by chapter. Now, I'm using the Holman Christian Standard Bible, so if you're reading from a different Bible translation, the read is different, but the message will be the same. We're going to continue in our study through the Gospel of Matthew in chapter 27, verse 1. When daybreak came, all the chief priests and elders of the people plotted against Jesus to put him to death. After tying him up, they led him away and handed him over to Pilate, the governor. Now, keep in mind, in chapter 26 was the previous night, which actually would have been like Thursday night. So the Last Supper and all of that would have happened on a Thursday according to our calendar. Jesus goes out into the garden, and there, remember, he prays. But earlier on, the chief priests, they were also plotting how they could get Jesus, how they could arrest him. And as they were strategizing, remember, Judas knocks on their doors and says, how can Judas knocks on the door and he says, I have an offer for you. What will you give me if I hand Jesus over to you? And they agreed for 30 pieces of silver. Now, the plan was to get Jesus away from the crowds. Previous attempts that they had to try to arrest Jesus, try to trap him in one of his teachings, to try to bring false witness against him, failed miserably, and they were always humiliated before the people. So they also knew that the people knew that they had no just reason or cause to arrest Jesus. And so this plot in their heads worked out fine, that they could arrest Jesus away from the crowds. And then they brought him to Caiaphas' palace, and there they had that kangaroo court. Again, there was no crowds, and literally it was in the wee hours of the morning. And so therefore they laid their false charges. They had their false verdict, their unjust verdict. And the only thing that they could not do is execute the death penalty. They were under Rome, and they had to abide by Roman law. And so the strategy was, and actually it worked, that they would hand Jesus over to Pilate with their verdict and their, in a sense, adjudication already complete. He's guilty. And you want to see this, that Pilate is not going to even question that. And we'll get to Pilate in a moment. Now, verse 3, then Judas the betrayer, seeing that he had been condemned, was full of remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders. I have sinned by betraying innocent blood, he said. What is that to us? They said. See to it yourself. He threw the silver in the sanctuary and departed. Then he went and hanged himself. Now, this is sad. It is sad. Now, Judas, what we're going to see in terms of the judgment, however, is that it's just. Remember, Jesus said about Judas that it would have been better if he had not been born. Judas, realizing he's condemned, realizing he made a horrible mistake. But notice what happens right here, because it almost seems like, that he's repenting, but he's not. He is expressing remorse for what he did, but he doesn't ask for forgiveness. He doesn't humble himself before God and then to say, Lord, I have sinned against you. Instead, what does he do? He throws the pieces of silver down and he goes and hangs himself. And that is the kind of ultimate in pride and selfishness and just kind of stubbornness against God. It's sad that with all that he did, he couldn't even enjoy, the 30 pieces of silver, that he was so guilt-ridden. But it's even sadder that in that, not realizing or humbling himself to the point where I've made this mistake and now I'm going to ask God to forgive me. But in his sinful, depraved nature, he hung himself. Now, verse 6. And then the chief priest took the silver and said, "It is not lawful to put it into the temple treasury, since it is blood money." So they conferred together and bought the potter's field, which is a burial place for foreigners. Therefore, the field has been called Blood Field to this day. Then that which was spoken through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. They took 30 pieces of silver, the price of him whose price was set by the Israelites, and they gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord directed me. Now, the gall of the Pharisees here, the gall of the Pharisees. Notice it, this fake piety. But in their minds, think about this. In their minds, they actually think that they were doing something holy, pious. Notice how meticulously they were to say, this money, now get this money, who we lied, framed the innocent man, brought false witness against the innocent man to have him arrested, paid this money to do this. We're not going to put it in the temple treasury because God wouldn't be pleased with that. But God would be pleased with you bearing false witness. I mean, let alone the Son of God, right? His chosen, right? A leader, a prophet, right? Touch not my anointing and do my prophets no harm. But yet you think God is going to be pleased with your act of righteousness here, or this obeying the law here? And really, that's how bad religious can be. That it is devoid of knowing and the true God, to knowing his heart. So this is amazing how meticulous. Anyway, verse 11. Now Jesus stood before the governor. "Are you the king of the Jews?" the governor asked him. Jesus answered, "You have said it." While he was being accused by the chief priests and the elders, he didn't answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Don't you hear how much they are testifying against you?" But he didn't answer him one word. I'm sorry, verse 14. But he didn't answer him on even one charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. Now, Pilate was the Roman ruler of the region of Judea. Okay, it wasn't necessarily a coveted kind of rulership either. But we also know from kind of history that Pilate he was sort of politically in trouble. And so he's treading lightly here because he can't afford an unrest. In other words, his whole point of being there was to keep the people in control. And there's some other political things that kind of put him in a bad light with Rome. So he doesn't want trouble. Now, verse 13, then Pilate said again to him, "Do you not hear how much they testify against you?" But he didn't answer him one word. But he didn't answer him on one charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. At the festival, the governor's custom was to release to the crowd a prisoner they wanted. And at that time, they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. And so when they had gathered together, Pilate said to them, "Who is it that you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus, who was called Messiah?" For he knew that they had handed him over because of envy. Now that's, again, notice this. We kind of see a motive here. Pilate is sort of hoping that reason would prevail. In other words, he's sort of hoping that you wouldn't choose Barabbas. Now, Barabbas was a zealot, and he had got arrested. He was actually facing execution because in his insurrection that he tried, he committed murder. So he was facing the death penalty. Actually, he was facing in what should be facing what Jesus is facing. The comparison here is that here you have this man who is without a doubt guilty of murder. And so Pilate sort of kind of puts him out there to say, well, obviously you wouldn't choose the murderer. Obviously you wouldn't. Obviously this innocent, just man, you're going to choose him. And so Pilate is really confused as to the attitude here, as we're going to see. Now, one other thing is that Pilate knew that Jesus was innocent, because not one time does he interrogate the Pharisees. In other words, it was in his power to let Jesus go. But again, he's handling this thing in a political manner. Verse 19, while he was sitting on the judge's bench, his wife sent word to him, have nothing to do with that righteous man, for today I've suffered terribly in a dream because of him. The chief priests and the elders, however, persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and execute Jesus. The governor asked them, which of the two do you want me to release for you? Barabbas? They answered. Barabbas, they answered. Pilate asked them, what should I do with Jesus who was called Messiah? They all answered, crucify him. Then he said, why? What has he done wrong? But they kept shouting, crucify him, all the more. When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but a riot was starting instead, he took some water and washed his hands in front of the crowds and said, I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourself. Now, that's a coward's way out. Pilate could have said, the man is innocent. I'm not going to prosecute an innocent man. Verse 25, all the people answered, his blood be upon us and on our children. Then he released Barabbas to them, and after having Jesus flogged, he handed him over to be crucified. Now, at this point, in a sense, Pilate handing down the verdict of guilty. Again, it is amazing that he is handing down a guilty verdict to a man that he knows is innocent. Now, of course, what he doesn't know is that this is God's purpose for mankind, even on his behalf, even on behalf of those who handed Jesus over to him, even the Pharisees. Now, when it says he flogged Jesus, again, part of this seems like Pilate was hoping that by doing this, now flogging, but let me say, he was hoping that by doing this, the people would see that there was no reason for Jesus to be crucified. In other words, he was looking really for an easy way out without him having to put himself in the crosshairs. Now, he could have defied the people and risked starting a riot, risk an uprising, and that's what he was avoiding that. Now, one of the things about flogging was that under Jewish law, when they would flog, they was only allowed a maximum 30 lashes. Okay, and the Jews would usually do 39, so that they wouldn't, just in case they miscounted, they didn't want to exceed the law. The Romans didn't have such a law. They could lay as many lashes on you as they wish. And the kind of whip that they used was sort of what they call a cat o' nine tail, and it had 3 strips. And in those 3 strips, it had bits of bones and metal embedded into it. And what would happen is that when they would lay the whip on you, it would tear into your back and rip your flesh. Your back was literally lacerated. And I also think about it this way, is that since they had 3 straps, it was like you were getting 3 lashes in one. So if they gave you 40 lashes, in reality, they was giving you 120 lashes. And some people even died from the flogging itself. And so Jesus, his back bloodied, the abuse, this was all prophesied. This was all prophesied in the Old Testament, that he would suffer this way on behalf of mankind. All right, I'm going to pick this up at verse 27 in the next video, so I'll see you then.